Hey, it's not live on the webpage. It's not live on Ben's YouTube. Oh, there it is.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of your favorite show, The Discourse. I am your host, Brandon, and we have a wonderful show planned for you this evening or whenever you're watching it. I don't know. It's pretty. I mean, you're gonna see it later, so probably. So I feel awkward dating it. It doesn't make. I feel awkward dating a lot of things. You know what? I don't want to get sidetracked. Sorry.
Shut up.
We have a great show planned for you. That's the gist of what I was trying to say. And to help me, discuss all of the wonderful happenings of the past week, I have my favorite panel with me, as always. My engineer, please unmute yourself, Richard.
Unmic yourself.
I totally wasn't muted. That delay had nothing to do with me unmuting myself. Thanks everyone for joining. Should be a good show. We had an interesting conversation leading up in the green room, so I'm looking forward to it. But I do have to sort out some technical things.
We were literally discussing drugs and murder.
Yes.
Okay, see what I'm saying? So you're gonna want to stay tuned for this one. So I'll go back to you, Brandon.
Oh yeah, okay. Besides Richard, we have my Socratic life partner, Adair. Say hello, Adair.
Hey, folks, give it up for your 2017 Stanley Cup champions, Pittsburgh Penguins, back-to-back. By the way, I'm going to continue to drink out of this cup during the show. It's your job to guess what's in it.
Dirty Fanta. Anyway, and finally, our white ally, John. Say hello, John.
How's it going, everybody? I'm not quite as psyched about Stanley Cup finals or championship because I don't give a shit about hockey, and I know I'm breaking stereotype there, but I don't.
I'm pretty sure I broke the stereotype by being the hockey fan to begin with.
Yeah, stereotypes are made to be broken. So I'm going to do two things tonight. I want to do two things tonight. The first is I want to have a really nuanced and detailed discussion about gun violence and who we blame for gun violence and how we define and conceptualize tragedy socially and all those other things. But I also want to sex with this mixed chick from Bushwick. And so I'm going to try to do both those things simultaneously.
You better stop now.
Don't mix those conversations up. That's all I got to say.
Yeah, that would be a real big problem considering what I'm into. So, let's start this off.
Politically
let's start
speaking,
this
for
off
her is what he's saying. She doesn't know quite how progressive he is.
You know what they say: progressive in the / YouTube, problematic in the sheets / more. I guess. Anyway,
let's get to the conversation. Let's.
We've wasted enough time already. No, so yesterday there was a rash of mass shootings and active shooting events, right? Active shooter events. And I know people tend to conflate those two things. Often when we talk about the epidemic of mass shootings, they tend to conflate, incidents where 4 or more people have been shot, which is what is defined as a mass shooting by some places, by some outlets, and active shooter events, which is an FBI distinction where, basically someone comes into public with a gun with the intent of shooting someone. You don't actually even have to shoot someone for being an active shooting event, right? So I think it's important to make that distinction in the beginning because yesterday there were 4 mass shootings and active shooter events combined around the United States of America. So the one I really want to focus on is what happened in Alexandria at the Republican Congressional Baseball Game Practice. That's a rough sentence, and which ended with, a few Congress people and a lobbyist being shot and ending up in critical condition. Specifically, Steve Scalise, and I forgot.
Did he get shot in the ass?
No, maybe.
Like that,
One of
I'm
the
pretty sure
officers
that he was shot in the
too,
ass.
I believe.
Yeah, 5 people were shot in the incident, right, by a guy who had driven from out of state to come and essentially for this, premeditatedly to shoot up the Republicans. And so, I want to have a frank discussion about this incident, and it's going to be a little bit politically incorrect. I don't normally provide that disclaimer, and I also don't mean that in a way I'm going to say the N-word a lot and expect you not to be offended by that, because that's usually what politically correct means. But I do want to have a frank discussion about what occurred. Right. So, John, would you tell us, would you break down a little bit what happened in Alexandria.
That's a little bit hard. So I was paying attention to the news briefly, and what I found out was that, like you said, it was a practice for this big bipartisan baseball game where the two sides get together and play each other. And this gentleman, like you said, drove there and decided that he was going to shoot up. Now, I don't know the details on the ground. What I do know, I looked a lot into his background and also into what everyone was saying about him afterwards. And I think that's more important than what happened on the ground. Obviously, this is a disturbed person who showed up in a game and shot individuals who are not, I don't want to say not responsible for any of his conditions, but they weren't responsible in the way that someone should take any type of action like this. And I don't condone any type of action like this anyway. So I can't say like, okay, yes, if these people had if these people had done something horrible to him, then he should go up and shoot them. But like this, it's such a level of removal from what was happening to this guy and what's happened to this guy his whole life that he was placing blame on them for things like his 17-year-old daughter killing herself because her boyfriend left her. Like he had a lot of a really troubled past, and it seems like a lot of it was just his anger was just massively displaced.
Well, I mean, yeah. So I don't think we really want to go too deeply into sort of the minutia of what occurred, right? So, like, we know 75 rounds were shot off. We know 5 people were injured. I think more important for this discussion is the way in which the entire conversation is being framed, as well as the way in which we generally frame this gun debate. Because I think we can be relatively sure, based on precedents, that nothing is going to happen. Yeah, we're not going to actually have any kind of gun reform. We're not going to actually have any kind of cogent debate about whether people should have access to, the kind of ordinance to enact these kinds of shootings. Because if it didn't happen, I've taken the position, this might sound bad, but if it didn't happen after Sandy Hook, it's not going to happen.
No,
it's like I don't see it happening. And so, let's move in.
Just real quick, I gotta ask.
Yeah.
There was no good kid there, right? But is Alexandria a mad city?
That's a bad joke. You should feel bad. Anyway,
it's a good joke, and you didn't get it.
Let's move relatively.
Well, I just want to say before we move away, because I'm sure we're going to talk about how it's portrayed, but there's a really good in-depth article about his past that does a pretty decent job from his hometown paper, and I think it's like BND, I think is what it's called, and it's worth a read. I'm
gonna be real with you, John. I don't give a shit about his past. Well, I don't give a shit, and here's why. Here's why. Well, no, hold on, because it is not you in particular, but it's America in general, and this kind of shit that we see every single time some shit like this goes on, right? A white dude does anything to anybody, and they're gonna go dig through his past. They're gonna find reasons. They're gonna make excuses. They're gonna be like, "Oh no, he's this." It's that same internet joke. News be like, this 22-year-old white Christian male sent himself and 20 other people to heaven today. But a person of color gets shot for doing nothing, and they're gonna dig through their past to find any and every. This dude could show up late to school one time, and that's gonna be paraded around. And so I don't give a damn about his past. He's a murderer. That's all that needs to be known about him. F him.
I thought they actually did a good job of actually addressing that, where they didn't, and I'm using this perfectly, they didn't whitewash his past. Like, they did not make him seem like he was deserving of some sort of charity, but they did lay out a bunch of problems in his past as well.
But it don't matter.
But here's the thing. Usually I would agree with Adair on this point, right? That, and a lot of times when we see these kinds of mass shootings, the Dylan Roofs, the racist samurai who stabbed somebody in New York City, there is this desire to either divorce to kind of abstract the causes of what happened, right? Like why did this occur? There is this desire to not call it white supremacy, this desire to not call it terrorism, this sort of favorable presentation of the perpetrator in the media. We see it hit like his Instagram selfies as opposed to his mug shots. We see all kinds of, but in this case, what we're actually seeing, I think is a good place to start, is like the rationale for who and what in his life is to blame for this. Where is where did this anger arise from? What was it that radicalized him, right? Normally we have the conversation, where was he radicalized, and we have and we talk about this again, the desire amongst the media to not call white supremacy, to not acknowledge that there is a strain, or rather foundation to American society that is resisting any kind of movement as it comes to civil rights for people of color, trans people, whatever. In this case, what is being blamed for this, at least in certain parts of the media, is Bernie Sanders, right? And this is not the first time, because Bernie Sanders was also kind of blamed for what happened in Portland, too, right? But so what we see is that what picture is becoming clear is this: that there are certain ideologies and certain affiliations that you're allowed to draw these patterns and connections to when these tragedies occur, but there are certain ones that are off limits, where you have to kind of just pretend like they don't have any influence on what occurred, right? So
I have this one request. Can we treat the Republicans that got shot like we do every single person of color, trans woman, LGBT person who is murdered? And can we treat them like the regular news media treats everybody else? Like, can we just drag them through the streets?
I'm all for it. The guy who got shot said that he was like, what was it? It's some.
He said he's David Duke without the baggage.
This is why I said we're going to be not politically correct. Fuck Steve Scalise.
Yeah, seriously,
it's just like I don't advocate political violence of this scale, or even political violence at all, right? I think some people also go, oh, if you're in favor of punching Nazis, what's wrong with shooting Steve Scalise?
There's a big difference between those two things.
There's a big difference between those two things. But I'm also not going to sit here and pretend like some people are that, today we're all Republicans. No, fuck them.
No, I'm never a fucking Republican.
Here's the best response I think.
But we're gonna come back to that issue a little bit later, because first I want to get your impressions about this desire to blame the left for what occurred. So let's start with you, Richard. You haven't said anything yet.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I wanted you to talk about at some point, I know we had talked about before, was why you think that people commit crimes. I think you laid out 3 particular pillars or explanations as to why people do criminal things, and I think that's important. And I guess I'll just be that person today, in that I know we're probably going to be pretty mean or rude or however people want to characterize it, but I think that bringing attention to why people do things, both the man who did the shooting and Steve Scalise, how he decides to enact policy, I think is an important discussion as well. That it takes a little bit more nuance, but we'll get there after we go ahead and drag him a little bit. I think
we're going to get to that too. Yeah. In saying fuck Steve Scalise. Steve Scalise is pretty, he speaks at white supremacist rallies. He, again, has described himself as David Duke without the baggage. He is he's been in ardent opposition to any kind of sensible gun reform. And I usually hate that term, sensible gun reform, but he really is the kind of no background checks, no any kind of restrictions on purchasing firearms. And people have been pulling those receipts from the Obama administration when he was, he was part of that Obama's going to take our guns crowd. I can't help but chuckle. I don't want the man to be shot in the street. No, I just don't want him to be in Congress.
Right.
Be in Congress. I don't think he should be a lawmaker in America in 2017. Maybe in 1917, sure, but not 2017. But again, that's not me advocating for him to be shot by someone who is, marginally, more or less, in need of help. But go ahead, John. You tell me what you're saying.
I was going to say quickly that they're already advocating for more guns, more security.
Yep.
Because that's
now they want they want congressmen to have guns now.
Yeah. So we'll go ahead, John.
Well, it's what I see with this guy is, and especially what I saw in the media was that the same thing that I'm seeing all across. And basically, anytime someone who espouses any type of leftism comes out, the central party, the Democrats, comes gung ho for them. I mean, Yamiche today wrote this horrible, despicable article for the New York Times. And it wasn't an opinion page. It was straight reporting. It was on their regular New York Times. And she wrote about how, this is a problem for the dark corners of the progressive left. And it's like, this guy was rooting for Bernie Sanders, but he was also rooting for Ted Cruz at one point. And on top of that, there was a shooter who I believe, and I can't remember his name, who actually mentioned Hillary in a manifesto as a main reason why he was doing what he was doing, and no one said shit about that. So it's just what's acceptable and what's not. It gets to like what Adair was saying about how they treat black people whenever they're the shooters. It's like the mug shots versus anything else.
Victims, bro, victims. That's what I hear is when we're the victims.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of like, why is it that there are certain people who are acceptable to be the targets of this kind of campaign? Well, it's an obvious smear campaign.
Why is they're conflating any anti-establishment with people that are going to go shoot up a baseball practice, essentially, and especially particularly of the left, where it's the least applicable. But go ahead, Brandon.
Right. Okay, but yeah, go ahead, Adair. Sorry.
No, go ahead, because I'm going to follow up after you're done, because I have some things to say about this too.
Okay, so here's the thing, right? So I can answer John's question, which is why, after there's been about 153 mass shootings, like not active shooter events in America. I think yesterday was the 154th or 153rd.
I think the actual correction is 148. It's 148. That was a misprint yesterday.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That's my bad, folks. Only 148.
Yeah, I like to be accurate because hyperbole in these situations makes us look like we're just pulling numbers out of our ass. It's important to be accurate.
Just to point out, we're about 147 days into the year, so
so basically we're having one a day.
Yeah, so there probably might have been one today that would help balance that out. But go ahead.
I would make the argument that the difference between 147 and 153 is not hyperbole, but you know what? And you're right. We should be accurate. But the answer to John's question is right. Like, why do these events become the ones that trouble the minds of everybody? Why is this a tragedy versus the dozens of mass shootings that happen in the South Side of Chicago? Mass shootings, by the way, that some calculations and some metrics don't even consider to be mass shootings because they're quote unquote gang related. Right. So if you get if the 4 people are shot on the South Side of Chicago, it's not counted as a mass shooting by, I think Mother Jones doesn't, because it's considered to be gang related. So you're basically gang affiliated. And we've seen this a lot of times. Like you're gang affiliated by region or by color and by where you're at. And by once you're labeled part of some sort of gang or gang affiliation, you're kind of dehumanized. So we don't count you in that metric. I think domestic violence situations don't count in certain for mass shooting statistics in some cases. But John's question is a simple one. Why is this a tragedy versus those a tragedy? And even more broadly, why is this a tragedy versus the thousands of people dying of cholera in Yemen right now? And the answer is it's quite simple. Both domestically and abroad, that we believe that there are certain populations that deserve to live in terror, right? Yeah. That there are certain populations that, for lack of a better word, should be afraid of gun violence. They should have to fear for their life. They should be the victims of violence, both state or interpersonal or gang or structural, whatever you want to call it, all forms of violence. And there are certain populations that if they become the victim of that exact same violence, it is a tragedy. It is this huge, national embarrassment, all of these things. And and maybe should is a strong word, but expected might be a better word, right? I think that some people would argue, some academics would argue that, like, for Western society to function, certain populations need to live in fear. And we talked about that with the slavery thing, right? Mm-hmm. That like black people need to be under the yoke of slavery in order to be civilized. Similarly with be under the yoke of the state violence, police state, etc. But there are certain populations that it's all part of the plan for them to live under the fear of violence. But go ahead, Adair. I'm sorry for going on so long.
No, you're fine. I think just generally speaking about what's going on and how we've seen this, the reason why it's a tragedy is, like you said, this happened to old white dudes. Like, that's the only reason why the American population is this is a tragedy, because if it doesn't happen to anybody that's not old, that isn't white, well, that's just day-to-day business, whatever. But what John said something earlier, that whole, all these people saying we're all Republicans today. One of the people that I follow on Twitter by the handle Kieran Opal said, what if I told you that you're all Republicans every day?
Yeah, I love
because
that.
It's true. Like, that is the most factual statement about this that I've seen. But and I'm going to circle back. I don't honestly care about a lot of these quote unquote leftists. Like, as a leftist, I'm not going to go out and commit terror. leftists are not going to go out and commit terror like that. The United States researchers have been saying for years, that you are more likely to be killed by a right-wing terrorist, a white male right-wing terrorist, to be exact, than any other type of terrorist in the world. Like that is the terror threat here in America. But suddenly you have two, and one of whom, by the way, was a right-wing terrorist, mind you. Like I'm talking the Portland one, when everyone's like, "Oh no, he's the Bernie guy." He did support Bernie Sanders in the primary, then switched to Trump. Fun fact about that is he probably was a Bernie guy for economic issues. His racism came second to him when it came to his politics. That's a whole other story, right? Like the left is not out here.
Posts from 2012 that were white supremacist posts. So long before the election, he was going white supremacy full out.
But you know what this is, right? This is again the atomization of identity, right? It's
but I'm going to push back. I want to push back on that though, because like I think it is atomization, but it's also weaponization for a specific message. And
this is modern, mainstream identity politics 101. Atomization, weaponization. Like we have a political enemy. We're gonna we're gonna be intellectually dishonest. Look at one part of their identity and use it against them.
Yes, well, and the one thing I want to say to back this up when we were talking about, because I want to push, I just want to make this point. I kept trying to make it because I didn't want to make it. It backs up what Adair was saying a little bit, but also pushes back on it. Adair was saying that it's white people and that are a major terrorist group, which is absolutely true domestically. But if you want to see it in how it's applied for U.S. imperialism, you can look at how they treated Aleppo versus Mosul. Aleppo were bombing the shit. They were getting bombed by the government because they had insurgents there who were harassing and terrorizing the people, but they were called freedom fighters. And in Mosul, the U.S. government and allies are using white phosphorus against the same groups of people who are terrorizing the populace, and we're called the freedom fighters on that end. So it's all about the weaponization of exactly what they want the message to say, So it's just a matter of who gets to decide that is my question,
Well, I mean, the white supremacists, Eurocentric hegemony decides who is and is not deserving of human rights, who is not deserving of any form of, freedom from fear, freedom from terror, freedom from any other thing. Right? It's just at that point, words like gang and terrorists are just forms of gaslighting. In terms of what happened in Alexandria and this new trend of a selective outrage. I mean, it's not a new trend. It's as old as America is. Selective outrage is just that. It's selective. It's certain groups they deserve human rights and certain groups don't. And when we talk about, and this is where the whole conflation of mass shooter with active shooting event comes from. There are certain locations in populations that are thought to be safe, and by safe, it's meant safe for white people to exist within. That's why shootings on college campuses are frightening. That's why shootings at malls are frightening. That's why shootings at specific sporting arenas or where the victims are, desirable parts of the population or respected or human parts of the population are overvalued, right? Like this mass shooting is worth every mass shooting that has been. This actual one mass shooting is worth all previous 147 combined. But yeah, go ahead, Rich. Sorry. What were you going to say?
Oh, I just I think this might be a good opportunity to just talk a little bit about what the point I mentioned about.
Wait. Oh yeah. Okay. Sorry. I'm gonna do this real quick. And also, let's pretend like this dude's the reason for why he did this was because he was a radical leftist. I think you could also make a legitimate argument that it wasn't the radical leftism that motivated him, but the constant centrist. Russia, GOP are elaborate conspirators in some sort of coup in America that could have radicalized him as well, right? He was a big fan of Rachel Maddow.
Yep.
He was a big fan of the Daily Show and all of these sort of centrist liberal positions that say that the GOP has been corrupted by this dangerous foreign power and they're trying to install, I don't know, neo-Stalinism. I don't know what the whole thing about Russia is at this point. It's very confusing.
Yeah, because some of them think it's still communist.
Yeah. Some think it's still communist.
A lot of people still think Russia is communist.
Some people think that we're going to be taken over by some sort of weird Eastern Orthodoxy dictatorship. It's very complex. It's a very complex series of theories. When for me, it's like, well, mafia ties, 100%, 100% mafia ties with Trump.
Yeah.
But no, let's pretend for a moment that this one portion of his ideology is what caused him to become radical, right? Let's pretend like that, that it is like the ideology is such a big component in people's actual lives. When I would argue it's not. That when looking at ideology for the reason why people commit crime, you might as well look at what their favorite music is, or what their favorite book is, or whether they play violent video games, because largely we're talking about people who have specific structural and social and material conditions that are influencing in their ideology. And hey, their ideology might make them choose a particular victim, but they're being radicalized by their actual material conditions or psychological issues. But
I don't know that it's always psychological, because there's things I want to push back on. I don't like, so the Charleston shooter, by all accounts, was your everyday average middle class white dude who just so happened to be he just was radicalized by racist imagery online, and he started with people like Ann Coulter. So when you grow up in an environment of racism, when you're fed this steady diet of black people are inferior to you and they're simultaneously violent, stupid, and taking over your country, I think that's enough to radicalize somebody in and of itself. I don't think that there necessarily has to be, and in this person's case, there wasn't, in my opinion, overriding economic factors. He was from, again, a middle-class white family. He was foreign American, doing well.
Well, here's what I would say. I would say psychological in issues like this, because I would say there's something inherently psychologically disturbed about anyone who would shoot into a crowd like that. But I would make that distinction. I don't
know. I feel like that's normal. For Americans, I feel like that is – I don't feel like that's a crutch that we can give these people. Some people are just evil, period.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I
don't agree with that.
I think that's a moral. I think that's a moral distinction. But
you guys don't think that some people are pure like this. So what are you going to say that would cause somebody to walk into a church and murder 9 people for no other reason than they're black? Specifically picked this church, wrote in their manifesto, you might wonder why I'm not going to the hood to kill people, but I'm not tough enough to take on gang members. That's not psychological issues, bro. That's good old fashioned Americanism. Simple and plain. That's just evil.
I would say that's psycho.
I agree that the act was equal. I agree the act was evil. I agree that his manifesto was evil. But I don't think that he was. I don't believe in that every human being is intrinsically good or evil. I think that he got there, and I don't know the steps that he possibly took. He
is evil. He is evil. What he did is enough to make me say he is evil. I don't give a damn if he was born that way. That's not my argument. Some people are just evil. He's evil.
Well, he would say.
I think people are redeemable and such, but go ahead.
I would say it's a confluence, right? We're talking about white supremacy as an ideology that has so perforated American society that it's become the norm, and then we have people who have, whether you want to call it evil or psychological disturbances or inherent deviance or whatever, are looking for targets for that aggression, right? So we know that the biggest predictors of whether you're going to do mass shootings or active shooter events is domestic violence or any other kind of isolative or antisocial behavior. It's not any particular ideology. It's not any particular demographic, really, in terms of white, but it's not really in terms of demographic.
Yeah, white is definitely more.
I mean, besides white male, yeah, absolutely. But in terms of age, in terms of monetary wealth, education, we have college students, we have older males doing, we have a lot of these people, but we know that there are actual certain issues involved in people's lives that are better predictors of this behavior than ideology. And so my point becomes that we focus on ideology in America, whether you're talking about mass shootings at home and abroad, to the exclusion of other issues, right? That's why I said we atomize it. We don't talk about, okay, well, hey, what is their structural conditions like? What are their psychological health like? What are these other conditions that might have influenced this? And
but we do in the case of white supremacist shooters.
We ignore that stuff.
No, they don't. No, they don't. They use those to find every excuse they can to say, well, this is why he did it. They give them every excuse in the book, and they go through a litany of those things, and a lot of times they make shit up. Not only was Dylan Roof mentally competent to stand trial, not only was he white from a middle class family, he was just a shitty person who did an evil thing. And upon feeling he could commit such an evil act, in my opinion, became evil. Period. Like there was not all of this. Like we tried so hard, and I think yes, We absolutely have to look at the structural environment. Yes, we absolutely have to look at things that are going on mental health-wise, generally speaking. But we also have to be willing to sit down and understand that sometimes people do horrendously evil things because that's what they want to do.
Okay, now do you think you should be put down?
This is we got sidetracked and we can come back to the conversation, but my larger point was this: even if we think that leftism was the cause of this thing, if leftism is an inherently radical ideology that has the potential in and of itself to lead to violence, the problem with that interpretation is that leftism also has solutions to violence. And it's just like, we can't compare right-wing founded violence, an ideology of like right-wingers conservatism with left-wing found ideology, because the problem with that is that left-wingers offer both short-term and long-term solutions to reduce violent crime in terms of changing structural conditions, providing access to mental health care and all other forms of healthcare and all other forms of resources that would make people less desperate to commit crimes, or less, in the case of mass shootings, the ability to actually seek out and find help, or be identified for help and have access to it. And also, restriction to firearms. So all else being equal, if all ideologies have the ability to radicalize people, because again, there's just as much evidence that he was radicalized by centrism or centrist liberalism, only leftism has like an actual solution to that problem. But again, in the part I agree with Adair, my only issue is that you can't legislate to evil.
That's fair. You're never going to be rid of things like mass shootings. We're never going to be rid of horrendously. We're never going to be rid of terrorist acts so long as there's people, right? People are going to find something to be mad about and find a reason to be angry enough to go out and do horrendous things. And that's just something that we also have to take the time to be willing to
know that has this problem.
Brandon, do you remember what I'm talking about? That conversation we had about where you kind of laid out your ideas for.
Well, here's the thing. So my issue with, and I know what you're saying, my issue with Adair's interpretation is not that some people aren't just huge dick bags who are going to shoot into a crowd. My issue is that those are an anomaly.
Yeah,
those are the anomaly. And so yes, there will always be people who commit crimes because they think crime is fun or whatever, but I would lump them into the category of mentally ill. That's criminally mentally ill.
Well, and one of the things that we're finding out in there's more research being done about it, but just as we understand empathy, that we find that biochemically speaking in the brain, that some people are less capable of feeling empathy than others, and that we've noticed that from what we've been able to sample, that there is seems to be at least a correlation between people with low abilities to feel empathy and sociopathic behavior.
Yes,
that's kind of like the definition of sociopath, of being a psychopath. You can't distinguish right and wrong if you're not empathetic to other people.
But similarly, we don't really even teach empathy, right? Like empathy is also a learned trait. You can be made empathetic to certain populations by having exposure to them. There's a reason people don't feel empathy for Black people when they get shot by the police, except for in small bursts. It's because they don't humanize them. They don't connect with them on that human level.
Yeah.
Regardless, what Richard was talking about is the fact that from a progressive standpoint, and if you want to hear more about this, I would say go to our SoundCloud, which is available at soundcloud.com/expanded discourse, and listen to our conversation with Michael A. Wood Jr. about crime and civilian-led policing. That the majority of crime is falls into one or two categories for why it occurs. Desperation caused by lack of access to resources, food, water, healthcare, et cetera, or some form of mental illness, for lack of a better term. I think that calling people mental ill when they commit crime, largely can be reductive, but there are certain elements of crime that are caused by mental illness. And that's just, if you want to solve crime, if you want to actually tackle, crime prevention, that's the way you do it. You address those two issues: structural causes, in mental health care. That's largely
not to say that people that with mental health issues are at higher risk of committing crime per se. It's just that I think
they are.
I think what we're trying to identify is that a lot of what isn't identified as a mental health issue often leads to crime as well. So it's not like people that are suffering from depression or from other various or common mental health disorders. That's the issue per se.
Don't get me wrong. People with mental health issues are way more likely to be the victims of crime than they are to be the perpetrators of crime. But this is more of a statement about deviance in society and what is the cause of crime. And so we get to this point where it's a very conservative position to say that people choose to commit crime because they're evil. Because that is the reduction.
That's not what I'm saying, though.
I'm not saying you're saying it, but like I'm saying that the interpretation that people choose to commit crime, people choose to be deviant from society, people choose to be evil is something that we hear a lot when people are trying to excuse why we can't have structural solutions to problems, why we can't have a universal basic income, or we can't have a raise in the minimum wage, or we can't have some sort of shift in redistribution of wealth. It's because people aren't being criminalized by structural issues or by ethical failings of society. It's because they have individual moral or psychological failures. And I know I essentially said there are some psychological aspects for why crime proliferates, but that's a different interpretation.
And I mean, we don't disagree. My only point here is that in America, and this is specific to white male terrorists of whatever variety, is we are so quick to apply each and every one of these things to that person, right? Even if they absolutely don't have any basis in fact. We're quick to say, oh, well, this lone wolf white male terrorist, which they're never really lone wolves, right? He only did this because he was poor, or he did this because he was abused as a child, or he did this because of X, Y, and Z. And sometimes that's fair and that's factual and that can be a part of it, but it needs to be called what it is, still terrorism. But there are some cases where we take those things and we apply them and they don't fit. And the other issue is we only apply those to white folks when these kinds of things happen. We never apply these things to victims of color. Not even just victims or people of color in general, rather, if they commit a crime. It's never people of color are doing this because they are in desperate need to feed their family, or because they were abused as a child, or because of the violence that they saw and experienced growing up. For people of color, it's always a moral shortcoming. But when white male terrorists do something, there's always a bevy of excuses or a bevy of reasons as to why they did what they did. And so there needs to be an equitable, these things need to be applied equitably.
I think I'd like to see that where it goes towards people being treated humanely on both sides rather than people being
treated less humanely on one side.
And also regarding any of the other aspects as well, like that we want the better of the options rather than both people that are treated equally bad.
Well, I mean, not
only
only
should it be talked about.
Well, not only should it be applied equitably, but we also need to actually start engaging with the individual being influenced by the structure they exist within, like their environment. Right. Because when we talk about white male supremacist terrorist attacks, it becomes just an excuse for why they can't be held responsible or for why they're just a troubled teen. And okay, fine. Like if we can agree that everyone who commits crime is in some way troubled by either their circumstances,
unless it's
psychologically or
financial crime.
Yeah, it's a high financial crime. Then they are just evil.
Yeah,
then they are literally just evil. If we can agree,
I'd say greedy and addicted, but that I've been working on that.
I mean, worship of money is probably a mental illness, but no. So if we can agree that these people, that everyone who commits crime is in some way troubled and the victim of circumstances one way or another, then sure, okay, fine. And if we can start actually engaging in societal changes at the legislative level that seeks to combat these issues, that's great. But it seems to sort of end at the individual. Well, this individual had a hard life, forgive him level, which is like, okay, but how do we prevent more hard life people from doing this? That conversation never sort of veers in that direction.
Oh no,
otherwise we're just waiting for the next one, which is not a sound strategy.
But I believe it's going on behind the scenes. We're just not privy to it because you see the militarization of our police. You see the rights of everybody being stepped on and curtailed in terms of monitoring. Like they're taking steps to make sure that everybody is targeted. Now you can say that whether or not they're targeting the correct people unfairly or doing a good job is probably a valid critique. But steps are being taken. They're not the correct steps, I don't think, but steps are definitely being taken. I mean, you see, there are small counties in North and South Carolina that have tanks, because they're worried about crime like this. shootings.
Well, I mean,
They're not worried
definitely.
about things like this. So,
I mean,
I would say that's late stage capitalism, and not that they're trying to do anything to proactively stop active shooter events or mass shootings. That's just them. And that's also cops think tanks are cool, and so they want tanks, and they want to pretend to be armies. Right? That's true. Separate from what's going on, I feel.
But this is most of these things, and I'm not saying all of them, but I'm saying a lot of these things we've seen have, when we talk about attributing people's, motives, a lot of it is economic. So isn't this increase? Isn't this a symptom of late stage capitalism?
I think that I don't think that there's been an increase of mass shootings that I wouldn't expect to see in any racist country. Capitalism and racism are not mutually exclusive, obviously. But the way I see this is I see police have this good old boys club. Police want to pretend to play. They want to be army. They want to think they're an army. They want to act like an army. And so when you give them militarized weapons, they then start to think, oh, okay, we're actually an army.
What's your point?
They don't want the rules of engagement that we have for our military.
Okay, here's
they want to play. They want to play military. It's a game to them.
2 important points, right? So, I'm like, statistics don't bet out. Like, mass shootings are not up. It's just not last time I checked for the article I wrote last year. Mass shootings hadn't actually risen by like a statistically significant level.
Late stage capitalism
going up, but not necessarily statistically.
I'm just saying, people definitely when you actually compare the way people feel about mass shootings versus whether mass shootings are actually up, it's like those are two different things. Mass shootings haven't actually increased in the past decade in any rational way. What it is that you have more. The media is inflating these mass shootings more and more as they sort of target more the socially valuable, soft targets, socially valuable places. So the
political ramifications of the mass shootings have been changing, which is that's changed the attention.
Exactly, and also it's becoming more and more obvious that there's not going to be anything done about it. Like the impotence of our politicians in the face of the private interest that is the NRA has made people more and more aware of the fact that we're just going to be victims of mass shootings forever. It's this cycle of brutality and outrage is going to continue into perpetuity because the NRA has basically everyone scared of being. Having money pumped into opponents for them in a primary. And second is that if the military, the police are a domestic military operation. Absolutely.
Yes.
They've always been. They've always been a neo-colonial force for the black community. I don't know if not to sort of agree with it there. I don't know if the militarization of the police force has much to do with the rash of mass shootings, but I do feel like it has a lot to do with surplus of military hardware and goods, and B, this feeling that certain communities need to live under the yoke of colonialism or some facsimile of colonialism, which is what the police are. And so we see, police have these. Police justify this military hardware with the war on drugs, with the war on crime, which is essentially a war on brown people or a war on poor people. So it's a mix. It's important to understand what is actually driving this thing, which is again late stage capitalism, but also how they rationalize it, which is we have to protect socially valuable populations from an inborn domestic threat, which is brown people, and that's how we sort of keep that's how we keep the machine going.
Brown people is primary target. I would say after watching what they did to Occupy and what they did to DAPL, and DAPL is of course a minority, but what I would say is that it's also any type of unrest. You could argue that a mass shooting is a symptom of a building unrest, especially when you see mass shootings in schools, in areas of soft targets.
What's the thing about
terrorism by another name?
Here's the thing, though. You can't actually respond to a mass shooting with that kind of military hardware, right? That doesn't.
They do.
You can. But ultimately, it's less effective than just having one or two, a SWAT team or it's some snipers. It's just my point is largely the way they justify this kind of military hardware on our streets is through the need to suppress this consistent inborn threat. Brown people within our society. And this comes down to the way it's the general, I don't know, what keeps that military industrial complex running, which is perpetual warfare. Warfare both at home and abroad. We have I mean, also at the prison industrial complex too, right? So
Yeah.
we have brown people abroad who want to destroy us because of our freedom, and we
Bullshit.
have no, really, you think? And also brown people at home who are inherently savage, who are inherently barbaric, who are inherently, they're chasing after white women, selling heroin and impregnating Becky, and so we have to have that same kind of force on our streets.
And just
And,
for your
and
viewers at home, Richard sells heroin. Brandon impregnates Becky.
I impregnate Becky's.
There's some guy on the East Coast is talking mad trash about my buddy, little Wiggy or something like that.
The point is, like, the parallels between the war on crime and the war on terror are it's the same war. Same with the war on drugs. It's all the same war.
Which
it's
I think
being
is important.
people-
I think this is with just about 10 minutes left or a little less. I think we wanted to also talk a little bit about how one of the things that's come out of this is a call for a return to peaceful political means and not the violence of
that was Ezra Klein. That was Ezra Klein who said that. Ezra Klein on Twitter said,
I mean, you've seen it from Congress people too. Basically, it's the rhetoric, and if we just calm down with the words that we're using, as if the policies themselves aren't violent.
No.
If the wars don't lead to the 22 veterans killing themselves every day.
Of course,
that these shootings and people go on.
Ezra Klein's going to be the avatar for this because he expressed it the best and then got a lot of pushback. So what Ezra Klein basically said was, we're lucky enough to live in a country where we solve political disputes basically non-violently, right? Like that our political discourse is not, is not violent. And that's the gist of it. He went on this long ass thread about it. But what he was saying is that our politics in America are non-violent. And exactly, right. And he went on this but what he really meant is that the way in which we make political decisions are often dispassionate and give the illusion of civility and sophistication. And this comes down to both a very, very, and again, we see this kind of language a lot too after mass shootings. We have to keep things, we shouldn't politicize this, right? Like what is politics other than actually, trying to solve problems in society, which I would consider a mass shooting a problem, especially with considering how many happen. But this just shows how shallow the definition of politics is and how shallow the definition of violence people are operating from is as well. Because this is something that Noam Chomsky said. It's like the Republican Party is one of the most dangerous organizations in America,
in the world.
I mean, in the world. It's like they are literally engaged in violence. They're trying to engage in violence against 28 million more Americans right now with the AHCA. Like the AHCA is one of those, them denying climate change and preventing mobilization on it is incredibly violent. The Iran sanctions are violence, and that was bipartisan. It's this whole thing idea that politics is that you can have some sort of weird apolitical, you can have some sort of politics divorced from its real world consequences keeps appearing in the media, and it just demonstrates how the media elite are so divorced from the consequences of the decisions that are being made by the politicians, and politicians themselves are also divorced from them. Whether it be about healthcare or about guns or about anything, or not even guns, or war or the poor, that they can describe organization, as such as Congress, who essentially decides or doesn't decide really to bomb 7 countries.
Yeah, they're all ready to go to war, but when the gunfire's pointed at them, they all took cover and had very little to do.
The Democratic Party and the Republican Party are two of the most violent organizations in the entire world.
Yeah, the only thing they agree on is fucking wars.
The only thing they agree on, the only thing that the government and the media agree on with the deep state is that we should be killing more people.
Yeah, and paying lip service to our veterans when they get back, and then not taking care of them, or preventing the suicide rate that I mentioned earlier, or the taking care of them physically with the type of healthcare that they need. It's disgusting, and what they're scared of is that people are going to associate that violence with them, and then act like you would if somebody was perpetrating that violence on you in a more practical or more everyday scenario, and that means acting violently back.
And that's what's
terrifying to them. And and that's what as again, don't condone violence or anything like that, but I can't help but notice that it sobered them up a little bit.
Well, I mean, it didn't sober them up.
At least for that day.
It led them to recall for, civil discourse, and basically to establish that there are certain, let's put it this way, there are certain proper ways to enact violence on the community, on the people. There are certain populations that it's okay to enact violence on. Not only is it okay to enact violence on them, but
With
enacting
the illusion
violence
of a
onto them.
democracy, as long as you do it that way. Then.
Yeah, the procedure by which violence is enacted, i.e., in Congress, you write a bill, you sign it, you do like that procedure gives that that procedure gives legitimacy to the violence you're actually enacting on the people, and to the point in which that you don't consider it violence.
Yeah, it's like it'd be one thing if you were just justifying and rationalizing the violence, but you've moved it away from even being considered violence, which is, to me, seems absurd.
That's what sanctions are. They write about sanctions. I mean, almost everyone has said about sanctions that sanctions are a means to make the populace of the country that the sanctions are being placed upon rise up against the leaders, because the leaders are not going to be the ones that are affected by sanctions. I mean, Madeleine Albright was clapping or saying it was completely justified that 500,000 Iraqi children died because she was hoping that the Iraqis themselves would rise up against Saddam Hussein after we spent decades supporting Saddam Hussein, because that's what the purpose of sanctions is. So you're putting violence on a people who might not even be powerful enough to stop a regime that you disagree with from doing what they're doing in order to get them to act on your behalf. That's fucking violence.
And in reality, actually inhibiting their ability to do so by.
I mean, even to a further
live on a survival basic code, Brandon.
Even to a further extreme, like violence against certain groups is considered apolitical. It's considered like it's a bipartisan effort, and by that degree, it's apolitical. Like violence against Yemeni children, violence against Iraqi children, violence against people of Afghanistan, violence against the Middle East. It's like Iran. That's apolitical. That transcends politics to some sort of to a deeper cultural issue, which is spreading American freedom, or whatever they call it now. Basically, imperialism. Imperialism transcends politics. It's only political. Like violence is only political when it is enacted on certain populations.
And that's to Adair's earlier point about that's one of the things that concerns me is, while I understand the desire, and I myself engage with it too, about calling some of these events with white shooters terrorism and terrorists. I also get concerned about the liberalization of the use of the word terrorist to describe as Brandon mentions, groups that we don't, or violent acts from groups that we don't like.
Well, we have to transition to the live, to the better half right now, but I will say this to end it off. I'm sorry, I'll let you get the last word there. It's like terrorist has always been a form of gaslighting. To label someone a terrorist has always been a form of asymmetrical warfare and propaganda, because what it does is it says that this foreign fighter, this person who has a grievance with the state. Don't get me wrong, there are obviously certain people who are terrorists. There are certain countries that are terrorists. A lot of foreign policy is, by strictest definition, by colloquial definition, is terrorism. It is enacting your political agenda with fear, fear of terror. And more often than not, terrorism is used as a way to justify violence against inflate the threat of a vastly under-equipped military force and justify violence against them in a way that would otherwise be seen as bullying. Go ahead, Adair. Sorry, you can have the last word.
No, I agree with that, but that's part of the reason why I choose to use the word terrorism.
Yeah.
When I speak about right-wing, white male terrorism, because it is, and if we use the regular dictionary definition, it is an act of violence against the community for political gain. That is the only reason why they're doing this. The only reason why the North Carolina terrorist went out and did what he did. It was an act of terror against the community for political gain, and that's it. So that what these guys are literally the definition of terrorism, and we just refuse to call them that because they're the preferred status folks in America, and so we've really got to start pushing back on that. We've really got to start using. I think if we're going to use the word terrorism, if we're going to use the word terrorist, I think we need to start applying it properly. And the best way to do that, in my opinion, is to call real terrorists and not just lone wolves and not gunmen and not all this other bullshit. They are terrorists. Period.
And a lot of times, white supremacist terrorism, by nature of the way it's treated by the media and by the state, because they recognize that a true critique of white supremacist terrorism would require a critique of the state. It would require a critique of the white supremacy that perforates all society. They choose to shy away from that because a too in-depth analysis would actually, result in critiques of capital, or would require a lot more, systemic critiques. But we're going to take a quick break.
You didn't really think you were getting the last word, did you, there?
No.
I'm sorry. We're going to keep talking. So we're going to move into the better half of the show. We're going to talk about the Democrats capitulating on the AHCA that get sanctions on Russia. We're going to talk a little bit more about the shooting, and we might talk a little bit more about the Keebler elf giving his testimony in front of the Senate Congressional Committee.
That motherfucker's
yeah, he is crazy racist. But please, if you haven't checked out the SoundCloud, there's a lot more content on the SoundCloud. It is SoundCloud.com/expanded discourse. Check out the better half of this show. Check out some, special interviews that we have posted there. Make sure to stick around for the Benjamin Dixon show. It's coming on right after us. Make sure to subscribe to either channel you're watching on. And, it's been fun. Take us out, Rich.
All right, and with that, we are out this moment.
And Brandon's still dumb.
I'm the dumbest.
I wanted to shout out for who we got next week, man.
Who?
Oh, Yasha Levine?
Yeah, we got Yasha Levine to talk about cybersecurity next week.
Make sure to check that out. We out.